So Jesus has gone to the beach. Jesus has gone to the equivalent of Topsail Island for a little R&R. Even Jesus needs to hear the slap of flip-flops against calloused heels and the cries of gulls and waves crashing on the sand. Even Jesus needs to feel the sun on his face and the wind in his hair and the smell of salt water. Even Jesus needs to lean back in the beach chair beneath the shade of an umbrella with the breakers just inches away and a cold drink in the cup holder. Even Jesus. Because you see, Jesus has been busy. Healing people, casting out demons, teaching, calling disciples, walking on water, feeding 5,000, and none of it good enough for the religious leaders of his day. Round and round Jesus went with one in-your-face challenge after another. What are you doing? Who do you think you are? By what authority do you do this? Constantly hounding him and trying to humiliate and discredit and delegitimate him. The religious leaders are always pointing their fingers at others, and especially at Jesus, and never themselves. Jesus, why don't your disciples wash their hands? It's not what goes in that's important, says Jesus, but what comes out of your mouths that's the problem. Because it comes from the heart. Murder, adultery, stealing, lying, slandering, gossiping about others. Worry, if you're going to worry about anything, about the actions that destroy relationships and community. Don't you know Jesus had to get tired? Throw up his hands. Whatever. The constant, do something for me. Explain yourself to us. Feed us. Heal us. So Jesus goes to the beach. Who here can't relate to that? And doggone it if someone doesn't start hounding him there too. She's a Canaanite woman. The Canaanites were those people who lived in the land before Joshua and the Israelites ever arrived. The story is a little disturbing because Jesus calls this woman a dog and tries to ignore her. You know, like you might a homeless person if you were walking downtown in Raleigh or Charlotte. Don't make eye contact, just keep on moving. Or you're sitting at an exit ramp at the light and there's one of those people there with a sign, roll up the windows, look away, look away, look away. What's this gentle Jesus, meek and mild, doesn't want anything to do with this woman? He's just doing what good Jewish men are supposed to do. Oh gosh, for once he's following the rules. She's a woman. You're not supposed to have any actions or activities or interaction with women. And she's a Gentile, a Canaanite on top of that. She's got 2 strikes against her. Now, through the years of my life, I've made an unfortunate and uncomfortable discovery. That in spite of my enlightened understanding, that in spite of my growing up in the 60s and the TV screens being filled with images of Martin Luther King, that in spite of schools being integrated by my freshman year in high school, I was raised in a culture and am a creature of a culture that taught me to be a racist. I don't mean that I want to be. I don't want to be. And a racist in my mind is not quite the same thing in severity as a bigot. For the bigots are the one who seek to orchestrate institutional means of persecution and derision and division and separate and exclude people. But racism is the subtle stereotyping and assumptions that seem to operate under the surface of reality. And I have found out that mixed in with the wheat of my life are some weeds. And these realizations snuck up on me when I least expected it. Like when I was in graduate school at the Presbyterian School of Christian Education in Richmond, Virginia, a very enlightened place and a wonderful education I received. And we had practical courses and theoretical courses, and one of the practical courses was puppetry. And at the end of a brief semester of puppetry, the people in the class put on a show for the community. So I'm in the audience, and this guy is in a little troupe of puppets that I think is cute and have been attracted to. His name's Bobby Womack. He looked like Christopher Reeves. Dark curly hair, dark wire grass eye. Bobby was cute. His little group starts to do their puppet act. And I noticed that Bobby, who looks like Christopher Reeves, has made, because we made our own puppets, a black Cub Scout puppet. And this thought flashes through my brain instantly. Why did Bobby make a black Cub Scout puppet? And then I went, what are you thinking? What difference does it make? But what I was doing was projecting an idealized image of what we're supposed to create that comes out of who we are. Bobby had a bigger imagination than me. I served as a church educator for 9 years, and then I went to seminary to get another degree, and I went to San Francisco Theological Seminary on the West Coast because I could get full credit for my degree from PSCE, among other things. It sounded exciting and different. So the first time I went to get my hair cut at a little beauty salon in San Anselmo, I walked in without an appointment, and all of the hairdressers were Asian. And I first thought that pops in my head is they're not going to know how to cut my hair. And then I went, you idiot. They know how to cut everybody's hair. What are you thinking? Later that year, I was driving down Interstate 5 in the center of California to visit friends from another church I'd served who were stationed at Edwards Air Force Base. And my little gray Honda Accord hatchback broke down. This is in the days when there's no cell phones, 1988. But I had one of those cardboard screens that you could fold up and unfold in your windshield, and on the back side of it, it said, "Call the Highway Patrol." So I put that in the back window, and sure enough, a trucker saw the message and called the Highway Patrol, and I got towed to a garage because I had AAA, and my car gets there, and I walk into the garage, and all of the mechanics are Hispanic. And the first thought that pops in my brain is they're not going to know how to fix a little Japanese car. And then I went, you idiot. They know how to fix everything. It's not just me. Roger Nishioka is one of the more outstanding educators and preachers in the Presbyterian Church today. He's taught at Columbia Seminary and serves a church in Kansas City right now. But when his family moved to Washington State from Hawaii, they went to McDonald's one day for dinner after they moved, and Roger looks around and pulls on the sleeve of his parents and says, "What are all these white people doing here?" He's Japanese American. He's grown up in Hawaii. We all inherit narratives that shape our perception of reality. We all live inside of stories of who we are and are supposed to be and how the world works and who and what the others are. One of the neat things that's on the internet, if you haven't discovered it already, are TED Talks. TED is an acronym for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. They're brief 10 to 20-minute conversations that someone has about different aspects and issues of life. And one of the better ones I've seen comes from a woman who grew up in Nigeria, whose name I will try to pronounce but will not do correctly. It's something like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. That's the way I'm going to pronounce it. We'll hope that's close. She's a writer, and she talks about the danger of a single story. She grew up the child of educators in Nigeria, and she grew up reading from a very early age. She thinks as early as age 4. And she grew up with British and American children's literature. Those were the books she read. Stories of white people eating apples and complaining about the weather and the snow and being glad to finally see the sun. And so when she began at the age of 7 to write her own little stories, she wrote about the same thing she'd read about. She did not know that beautiful people with chocolate-colored skin like her had or could live inside of stories born of their own reality. And when she discovered that there were African writers writing about people like her, it shifted how she saw the world and opened up what she could actually write about. They were not wealthy, but they had a houseboy who lived in a village out in the countryside. The overriding story her mother told about this boy was that he was poor. So they gave him clothes and food to take home. But then one day, they went to visit him in the village where he lived, and he showed her this beautiful straw basket that his brother had made, and she was awestruck. All she knew of this boy is that he was poor. She had no idea poor people could make beautiful things. And again, her narrative shifted. She came to America to attend college, and her roommate was just awestruck that she was so fluent in English. How did you learn to speak English so well? She told her, English is the first and national language of Nigeria. And then she told this young woman that she wanted to hear some of her native music from Africa, and she was dumbfounded again when she shared her CD of Mariah Carey. The American girl had imposed a single story on her roommate from Africa before she even met her that was completely divorced from reality. Chimamanda was confronted with that in her own life when she visited Mexico. The only story she had heard about Mexicans was as abject illegal immigrants. And she was shocked to walk the streets of Guadalajara and see people in sidewalk cafes sipping tea, and merchants and families, and a world vibrant and alive and full of vitality. After she wrote her first novel, she went on a speaking tour and was at a college. In the novel, one of the characters is a physically abusive father. After she spoke, a student came up to her and said, how sad it was that Nigerian men were so abusive. And she told the student in response that she had just read the novel American Psycho, and how sad it must be that all young American men are serial killers. It's very natural for us to slip into stereotypes. She said the problem is not that stereotypes are not true. There's always a kernel of truth in them. It's that they are incomplete. One understanding of power, she shares, is the capacity to make one story the definitive one, regardless of whether or not it is true. Show a people as only one thing, and that is what they become. So she says, if you start the story of North and South America with Christopher Columbus, you get one story. But if you start the story with the indigenous Native Americans who lived here for thousands of years before Columbus, back even beyond the days of Jesus, and they had their own civilizations, you get another story. Or if you start with the story of the failed African state, you get one story, but if you start with the colonial story of the European creation of the African state, you get a different picture. We have to be careful about how we see reality. This little story popped up on Facebook this morning, shared by a friend of mine I went to PSCE with. A lovely little boy was holding 2 apples with both hands. His mother came in and softly asked her son with a smile, "Hey, can I have one of your 2 apples?" And the boy looked up at his mom for a few seconds, and then he quietly took a bite out of one apple, and then he took a bite out of the other one. Well, she tried to hide how disappointed she was in her son's response. And then he said, "Mommy, here you go. This one's the sweeter one." No matter who you are, or how experienced you are, or how knowledgeable you think you are, always delay judgment. Give others the privilege to explain themselves. What you see may not be the reality. Never conclude for others. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that humans are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death, and whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. Maybe we should be comforted by seeing Jesus' humanity in this moment, in this story. Maybe we should be grateful that he is also soft and yielding and a disciple of life. So on the one hand, we have here Jesus just doing what is normal and expected for a Jewish man in public with a Gentile woman, but on the other hand, well, this is Jesus. So we have to keep in mind as we read this story through a filter of 2,000 years that what we know today, Mark and his contemporaries were just trying to learn. For he was a Jew writing a gospel to convince other Jews that this is the Messiah that they've been waiting for. And this is all brand new, and it's almost as if we can see him trying to work this out in the story. And not only is that what he's trying to do, but he's a Jew trying to convince other Jews that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah in a context where there are already Gentile believers. It's all mixed up. How do you blend these two worlds that have always been so separate? So this woman kneels before Jesus, and he wants to blow her off. I've got to feed the children of Israel first. It's not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And he's already in Mark experienced defeat and frustration with Gentiles. After he healed the demoniac, they begged him to leave their region. They didn't want anything to do with him. Secondly, here we are dealing with bread again. Bread of heaven, face of God, bread in Jesus. For the moment, he is locked in the single story of this just being for the chosen people. For just this moment, he's not seeing the larger story, a story that goes all the way back to the prophets. Here are the words of Isaiah 42. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people who walk upon it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations. To open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, and from the prison those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. See, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. The people of Israel were not chosen because they were exceptional. They were chosen because God loves and wanted the world to know it is loved. Their chosenness was to reveal God as the one who chooses. And if Jesus is the Messiah, then this woman is supposed to get bread. This woman sees what others do not. She sees what the disciples don't yet fully understand or see. She sees what the religious experts who are supposed to know everything about God cannot see. She sees what even his own family and close friends from his hometown could not see. She sees what maybe even Jesus had not yet fully seen. She bows at his feet and says, Lord, help me. She bows down and worships him. And like the hemorrhaging woman earlier in Mark, who knew all she needed to be healed was to touch the hem of Jesus' robe, this woman knows a little goes a long way. All she needs is to lick her fingers and dab the crumbs left on the floor and put them back on her tongue. In the story world that Mark is weaving, he is setting Jesus up. He's had this debate about what is acceptable and what is righteous behavior and what is clean and what is not. And here's this woman teaching Jesus. And suddenly he's got to practice what he preaches. Oh, why didn't I see this before? Great is her faith. She defies all the stories and definitions and limitations the world would put upon her. She dares to believe that God is for her when everyone else in the world is not. She dares to believe that even crumbs from the Lord's table are enough for a feast of mercy. Faith the size of a mustard seed. Faith that moves a mountain of prejudice and judgment and oppression right out of the way. We are tempted to believe that the church is a members-only institution, that our primary mission is to take care of our own. But the church exists for the world, and Jesus let an outsider teach him a thing or two. What do those outside our circle have to teach us about God and grace and love? And what does Jesus do next? He goes straight back over into Gentile territory and sticks his fingers in the ears of a deaf man and says, "Be opened." A newfound openness in Jesus' own heart leads him into a larger story. But that's not all. In the next story, he continues on into Gentile territory and feeds 4,000 hungry souls with, yeah, you guessed it, bread. This table is the table of acceptance. No crumbs or leftovers here. You get the whole loaf. There are no outsiders here. For God gives us his whole self. Can we do the same?